What's up, Jeremy Schaap? How are you, sir? What's going on?
Richard, it's good to hear your voice. It's very good to hear your voice. And yes. I savor any opportunity, and they don't come along very often, to talk about modern pentathlon, which is my favorite sport. And it makes me kind of unique in American media anyway. It might be a little different in Hungarian media, Serbian media, but modern pentathlon is my favorite sport. And Boris Onashenko in 1976 in Montreal, he disgraced not only himself, but really the entire sport of modern pentathlon. And if your listeners are unfamiliar with modern pentathlon, it is the Olympic event, although, of course, it's not only contested at the Olympics, which tries as best as possible to approximate the skills required of a Napoleonic courier. So it's fencing, shooting, running, swimming, and riding. Perhaps the most famous Olympic modern pentathlete was George Patton, General George Patton. He was not yet a general, who I believe finished out of the medals, but I think in the top 10 in 1912 in Stockholm.
Is that because he slapped the competition? Speaking of Nancy Kerrigan?
Wow.
Is that why?
No, actually, it's ironic because Patton was actually undone by his performance in the shooting competition. That's true. But anyway, Boris Onashenko was a modern pentathlete competing for the Soviet Union.
Yes.
I believe he is Ukrainian. I think he might still be alive, actually. He wouldn't be that old. And he'd won a medal in 72 in Munich. I think he was the silver medalist in 72 in Munich. But in 76 in Montreal, he rigged his épée to register false touches in the fencing competition.
How do you do that?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer. And he was caught. He was caught, and he was disgraced. And he was shipped back home unceremoniously.
Yes.
And after that, really lived in ignominy in the final stages of the Soviet Union.
So, Jeremy, a couple things from this. Number one, I'm a big modern pentathlon fantasy player, so I know all about this. I grabbed Boris in my snake draft earlier this year, not knowing, unfortunately, the lush history of his ignominy, to use your big word that you just dropped in there.
Thank you.
And then secondly, I don't even know what else to say other than the fact that Chris Brockman has fact-checked you in real time. And this is all spot on, correct?
Yeah,
this is all spot on.
So George Patton finished 5th in 1912.
I thought it was 8th. I just said out of the medals, so I wasn't technically.
You said out of the medals.
You were technically right.
Yeah, fine.
And Boris Onashenko is still with us, 83 years young.
Wow. I'd love to do a story about him. I think he's in Kiev, isn't he?
Correct.
How would that, Jeremy? Tell me how that pitch meeting goes for Outside the Lines. How does that pitch meeting for E60? How does it go? How does it go?
Like that would be, more mainstream than most of the ideas I try to get greenlit.
You know what, Jeremy?
That's a little sexy. That one.
You could put that on. You could put that on ESPN minus.
Actually, I don't know how much time we have. I know you're.
No. Please, Jeremy. This is delightful.
I actually want to retract Onashenko. As fond as I am of the story, there's something much more bizarre. Easily the most bizarre story I ever covered, and I covered to some extent the Kerrigan Harding thing because I was working for CBS at those Olympics in Lillehammer, which was insane.
Yes.
But I don't know if you remember, this really is number one, and I can't do it justice here, but many of your listeners will remember this. There was an NHL forward, Mike Danton. He was playing for the St. Louis Blues at the time. He previously played for the New Jersey Devils. And he went to prison after pleading guilty to murder conspiracy charges. And in layman's terms, he tried to hire a hitman to kill his agent, David Frost, who had also been his youth hockey coach. Now, in Canada, it wasn't quite the O.J. Simpson story, but it was a much bigger deal than it was here.
Sure.
But this was a story that I covered at the time it happened, like the week it occurred. And then for years, I wanted to do a bigger story about it. And eventually, Mike, who at that time was freed from prison, we'd pursued him in prison, but after he was freed, I went up to see him in Nova Scotia, where he was going to college. And he agreed to do an interview. And David Frost, who had been the target, was living in Southern California. And he agreed to do an interview, and it led to probably the strangest story I've ever worked on. There's so many layers. I can't do it justice here. But that's the one that should be a movie.
So,
Mike Danton. You remember Mike Danton, right?
Oh, sure. I do remember that. Okashenko Retraction was a great... what was that? A great Alan Pakula movie of the 1970s. That was I think it starred
right after what?
Warren Beatty or something like that.
Yeah.
So before I let you go, Jeremy, I was going to ask you to recite the Royals in succession, but I don't want to do that to you, even though I'm more than happy to have you do it. But I was thinking of actually calling you.
More than happy to do it.
I was thinking of actually calling you a couple of weeks ago, and I'll have you right now. The passing of George Thomas Seaver, sir. What a beautiful photograph you put of your dad interviewing, him and Muhammad Ali, or him and Namath together, or something like that.
Yeah, it's him and Namath on, I think, the first edition of the Joe Namath show in '69.
So go for it on the Seaver front. Your memory of him, the first time you met him, or your dad's relationship with him.
Yeah,
please.
Well, so I was born August 23rd, 1969. Obviously, they won the World Series about 7 weeks later. And Seaver was the biggest sports star maybe in the country at that time after the incredible season that he'd had. And then that off season, he and my father wrote a book together. And they'd already known each other, I think for a couple of years. He was a rookie in '67. And they wrote a book together, which was Seaver's memoir at the age of 25, The Perfect Game. And it centered around Game 4 of the World Series. But I grew up... my dad was very close to Seaver. We lived in the same community in Connecticut for a few years. It's one of those memories, like, could you really have a memory because you're so young, but you're told it so often that it feels real? But when I was like 2 or 3, my dad came home with a couple of cats from a litter, Himalayan cats, and we kept one, and my father named ours Gandhi, after Gandhi.
Yes.
Himalayan, vaguely Indian.
Of course.
Not vaguely, but, and Tom took the other cat, the Seavers took the other cat, and they named theirs Ferguson, because he had just lost the Cy Young Award in 1972 to Ferguson Jenkins. And so, I didn't see much of Tom after that growing up. So, once in a while, but, I always felt this connection because our cats were brothers. And I think it's one of those, I kind of have some memory of him missing a spring training start because the cat got loose in Florida, and he spent days looking for it. But, when my dad died 20 years ago, these are the things that stick with you, Rich.
Years.
And you've experienced this recently, the things people tell you when your dad dies.
Right.
And, Tom wrote me this beautiful letter, and it just meant so much to me, handwritten note. And, he's, me and you were born the same time in New York in that era. You couldn't be a bigger star than Tom Seaver. And so many of my childhood memories in my sports fandom are just wrapped up in who he was and what he represented, the greatness and the professionalism. And I remember when I heard the news 5 years ago that he was seriously sick.
Right.
It was just crushing.
Jeremy, love you, man. How's life? Everything good? Everything good?
Hanging in
Jocelyn
there.
good? Kids good? Everybody good?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting. So but we can all say that now.
I know that. Well, look, it's always interesting when you chime in on our poll question about Boris Ogachenko or whatever.
Onashenko.
Oh, my bad.
Onashenko.
Sorry. I'm sorry. And he
I
was.
can tell you another modern pentathlon story. My father, he got into trouble with the USAC. This is true. This is in the early 90s. He was friendly with the best U.S. modern pentathlete, Rob Stahl. I don't know where Rob is now.
Okay.
But they had no money. The USOC back then and its federation, some of them were so poorly funded, they couldn't send our team to the World Championships, which I believe were taking place in Budapest, in Hungary, but maybe it was Novi Sad in Yugoslavia. Anyway, so through some of my father's connections, they ended up getting sponsored by a topless bar in Lawrence, Kansas. This is a true story, the U.S. Modern Pentathlon team. And USOC was not amused. That's pretty much the whole story.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jeremy Schaap, everybody. You're the best, Jeremy. You take care of yourself, buddy.
Thank you, Richard.
Much love.
You.
That's it. That's Jeremy Schaap.
Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.